Marc Marquez has made a rare and candid admission that despite years of tension and fierce on-track battles, he still regards Valentino Rossi as one of the riders he admired most when growing up. The 8-time world champion revealed that the doctor was a major influence on his early career, even though their relationship has been defined as much by conflict as by admiration. Speaking openly when asked about his idols, Marquez explained, "Of course Valentino was one of them, but Dani Pedrosa was the main reference point for me," said Marquez. From a young age, the Spanish sensation followed Rossi's career with enthusiasm, and his very first encounter with the Italian legend remains etched in his memory. Back in 2008, when Marquez had just made his debut in the 125cc class, he finally met the rider he had idolized throughout childhood. Pedrosa, however, had been a more consistent figure in his life, with the two maintaining a close friendship since their formative years in Spanish racing. But where his bond with Pedrosa has stood the test of time, his relationship with Rossi became increasingly complicated. Childhood admiration eventually gave way to tension, culminating in the infamous Sepang clash of 2015. That incident remains one of MotoGP's most controversial moments, dividing fans and leaving an indelible mark on the history of the sport. Marquez himself acknowledged the natural cycle of admiration in racing. As a youngster, it was normal to idolize the established stars. Now, however, the tables have turned. With 9 world titles to his name, 7 in the Premier class, Marquez is the one being watched by the next wave of hungry, ambitious riders. When I arrived in MotoGP, I was only looking at idols. Now I am older and the young riders come with new energy and they look at us in the same way, Marquez admitted. That generational shift mirrors the very path Rossi himself once walked, transforming from a fiery young challenger in the early 2000s to the senior statesman of the paddock before his retirement in 2021. Marquez now finds himself in that same role, admired by many, scrutinized by some, and inevitably targeted by rivals who see beating him as the ultimate validation. Interestingly, Rossi himself recently weighed in on the subject of rivals during a media session in Jakarta, where he was supporting his Pertamina Enduro VR46 racing team. Asked to reflect on the fiercest opponents of his career, Rossi named Casey Stoner, Max Biaggi, Dani Pedrosa and Jorge Lorenzo. Notably absent from the list was Marquez, despite the pair's heated battles on and off the track. "I had many strong rivals in my career, and I think it was between Stoner, Lorenzo, Biaggi and Pedrosa. It's difficult to say who was the biggest rival. Maybe Lorenzo, because we were in the same team for so many years. It was not just rivalry, it was like a love story," Rossi commented with a smile. Marquez's candid remarks highlight the complicated psychology of MotoGP rivalries. Admiration and respect often coexist with tension and hostility, and the Marquez-Rossi saga perfectly encapsulates that paradox. For Marquez to openly admit that Rossi was his idol underlines the depth of influence Rossi had on an entire generation of riders, even those with whom he later clashed. Rossi's omission of Marquez from his own list of rivals is equally telling. To Rossi, the true rivalries were those that spanned multiple years, defined by direct competition under the same conditions, particularly his explosive battles with Lorenzo. With Marquez, the conflict was shorter but far more toxic, leaving wounds that time has yet to fully heal. What stands out is how the legacy of both men remains intertwined. Rossi may not publicly acknowledge Marquez as a primary rival, but history will always connect them, from their unforgettable wheel-to-wheel battles to the controversies that electrified global headlines. For MotoGP fans, this revelation from Marquez serves as a reminder that even the fiercest rivalries are built on a foundation of admiration. Without Rossi paving the way, perhaps Marquez's own career would have looked very different. And with Marquez now in Rossi's former position as the idol of the grid, the cycle of hero worship, rivalry and legacy continues in the ever-evolving theatre of MotoGP. Beyond the rivalry and the media storm that surrounded them, The careers of Valentino Rossi and Marc Marquez underline how MotoGP is built on generational handovers. Rossi was the global icon who transformed the sport into a mainstream spectacle, appealing to fans far beyond traditional racing circles. Marquez, in contrast, brought a fresh era defined by aggressive overtakes, physics-defying lean angles, and sheer dominance in the early 2010s. The clash of these two eras inevitably created friction. It is also important to consider the cultural dimension. Rossi represented Italian passion and charisma, a showman who wore flamboyant helmets and celebrated victories with theatrical antics. Marquez, meanwhile, symbolized Spanish grit, precision, and an almost robotic consistency in his prime. To have such contrasting personalities sharing the same track ensured that their rivalry was not only athletic, but also ideological, resonating deeply with fans who often chose sides. Marquez's confession that Rossi was his idol strips away the myth that their animosity was rooted in pure hatred. Instead, it reveals a more human dimension, the disappointment of a young rider whose dream hero later became his fiercest critic. That emotional shift from admiration to rivalry is something that continues to fascinate MotoGP historians and fans alike. At the same time, Rossi's reluctance to name Marquez as a true rival could be interpreted in several ways. Some argue that Rossi deliberately downplays Marquez to avoid giving him the satisfaction of recognition. Others believe Rossi's words reflect a deeper truth, that Lorenzo, Biaggi and Stoner were part of long-running rivalries fought across multiple seasons, while Marquez represented a different chapter marked more by controversy than sustained competition. Another intriguing layer is how both riders have shaped the careers of others. Young stars such as Jorge Martin, Pedro Acosta, and Fabio Quartararo often mention Marquez as their reference point, just as Marquez once looked up to Rossi. Meanwhile, many current riders grew up as Rossi fans, inspired not only by his victories but also by the vibrant personality he brought to the paddock. In that sense, both men remain touchstones of inspiration, even if their relationship with each other never healed. What also cannot be overlooked is how commercial interests magnified their rivalry. Broadcasters, sponsors, and MotoGP itself capitalized on the Rossi versus Marquez narrative, elevating the drama into a global talking point. The 2015 Sepang incident became not just a sporting controversy, but a cultural moment that transcended the sport, cementing its place in MotoGP folklore.